Welcome to BC Brew on Tap from Mahoney & Sons at Canada Place as we pour the spotlight on the BC craft brewing industry. We're going to take you to the quiet little confines of Aldergrove, British Columbia, where a brewery called Dead Frog Brewing has been in existence for
9 years. 9 years.
Derek Smith is the founder, and Cole Smith, coincidentally, who is the son of the founder, is the head brewer. So I'm going to guess you guys have a beer connection. Maybe was it the father passing the gene on to the boy, or
Absolutely. Yeah, we've been brewing. I've been brewing beer since I was like 17 years old. So Cole's grown up in beer land since he was probably a little too young to be in a brewery.
So was it immediate, Cole? Were you looking at your dad going, wow, he's making beer, this is cool? I mean, were you an immediate fan, or?
Well, I mean, who goes to high school and doesn't want to drink beer?
Yeah, exactly.
So all through high school, it was kind of like torture for me, seeing my dad around beer all the time and me not getting any. So from that point on, it was like, this is what I want to do.
So at what point then, Derek, did it go from being just like a little hobby to throwing your hat in the ring? Because again, if you go back in time in terms of history, you know, it was kind of a risky venture. I mean, today you see all these people like opening up their storefronts, but then it was more of a calculated risk.
Yeah, I started in the commercial beer business back with a brew on premise, and that was like 23 years ago now. A few years later, we rolled it into a small craft brewery called Backwoods Brewing, and then at some point when we were way too busy in our family, because we are a family operation, we were just busy doing too many different things, we decided to focus in on the beer, and at that point we took a look at, you know, what's it going to take to make a real successful brewery, and that was about 10 years ago that we made that decision.
So when you made that decision, again, 10 years ago, the landscape was a lot less crowded than it is today.
Yeah.
But at the same time, there was probably a lot more skepticism from maybe financial institutions that were looking to back you, going, really? You want to throw your hat in the beer ring when there's like these three giant companies out there that are sort of controlling the industry?
Yeah, when I started off, it was Shaftesbury and Tall Ship Brewing and Sailor Hagar's over in North Van, and you know, most of those breweries are gone now. So it's just a matter of that shift and that gaining that consumer acceptance.
So, Cole, I want to ask you, it's one thing to sort of have the backing of your dad, who's the founder of the company, but at the end of the day, you better be able to deliver, because this is business. This isn't about family now. This is about business. Was there any hesitation on your part, or were you kind of nervous sort of throwing your hat into the brewing ring?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, when I came on as head brewer, that's a huge amount of responsibility for me. So to be able to just jump in and do it I was definitely, knees were shaking and I was sweating, but here we are, away we go, and I'm confident in what I can do, so we're just doing it.
Was Dad supportive? Was he critical, constructive criticism?
Absolutely. It was a very large push to kind of do it, and then once I jumped into it and actually figured out this is really what I want to do, then it was, from that point on, it was just go, 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 steam away. Okay,
so when you make beers, and I've been familiar with a number of your beers, you've got a couple of stars in your portfolio, which you'll talk about in a second, but when you make beers, Derek, from a business perspective, do you base them on what the market is looking for, or do you base them on what you and your heart of hearts enjoy?
It's from what we enjoy. When we sit around, we'll try, you know, part of our job is to drink beer, so we do a fair bit of that part of our job, and we just figure out kind of what's available, what's possible, what could be next for us. And again, if we don't like a style of beer, we just don't brew that style. We're just not interested in it.
So conversely then, if the public doesn't enjoy a style of beer, I guess it's chopped, as they would say, right?
Yeah, I mean, we have some beers that are wildly successful and some of them not so much, and you know, those are the ones we replace on an annual basis.
Now, Cole, you and I were talking before we started the show today. We're talking about like cask events and stuff, because I think that's where every brewer gets a chance to just go crazy. And you could literally throw gummy worms and Smarties and prime rib into a cask, and somehow somebody out there is going to like it. Does that, as a brewer, does that interest you, or are you more along the traditional lines of, I want to make sensible beers that everybody's going to enjoy?
For me, it's a chance to play with flavor. So if I have an idea, I want to do a jalapeno something, and you don't know if it's going to work on a large scale, it's great to be able to throw it into a 40-liter cask. And if it works, awesome. And if it doesn't work, well, it was a cask. And you just kind of move on from that.
So one and done, and move along. Okay, let's talk about some of the beers, because we've got some in front of us here. You've got the classic nut brown ale. I know that's probably the staple in the Dead Frog family. Is that fair?
Yeah, it's the one that's been around the longest, for sure.
Okay, so you also have something called Atomic Cherry. Sounds kind of sour, is it?
Yeah, it's a more on the tart side. We kind of toned down the amount of sour on it, so it'd be a little more consumer friendly. It's got a really solid cherry flavor to it. Cole did lots of experimenting and figuring it out when and how to add cherry and make it work.
Okay, let me ask you, Cole, the experimentation process. Like, how many fails were there before you went, yep, that's the one?
There's always a couple, and we've done this enough times now that sort of working through the process, you get to know sort of this really doesn't work or this might work next time. So we had probably 4 or 5 that didn't go out so well. And then after that, it was pretty straightforward, and we nailed it.
Okay, and what is the process like? Is it like a communal table? Like, is it you shoot it around the family, shoot it around the plant? Do you like go out and like cold call people and go, hey, try this beer before you decide on? How do you do that?
We've got about 15 employees in our company, and 5 of them are family, and there's a few more that are real integral into how we make our decision-making process. So we do a lot of it just round table around the brewery. We bring in a few other people. Sometimes we'll do a cask or a little bit of a consumer push someplace to really get some other feedback on it.
Okay, I have one final question, and Derek, I'm going to throw this at you.
Okay,
the name.
I can handle it.
Dead Frog. Where'd that come from?
Well, we were, like I said earlier, we were Backwoods Brewing before that. And what we found with that name was that it was not memorable. People were Backwoods, Blackwood, Backwards. What the hell is the name of that company? Excuse my, yeah. And so we had to go to something that we wanted it to be memorable, a little sarcastic, fun, irreverent, not necessarily politically correct, not standard. And so that's what we landed on. People know who we are.
Because nobody ever forgets seeing a dead frog.
There you go.
Is that fair to say?
Absolutely. And we want them to have a smile on their face.
Derek Smith, Cole Smith, pleasure. Thank you so much. They're in Aldergrove. They're called Dead Frog Brewing. This is BC Brew on Tap on Shaw TV.
Host hair services for Joe Leary and BC Brew on Tap provided by Bailey Murphy of Avant-Garde Hair Studio in Yaletown at 1075 Mainland Street. For a list of services, call 604-688-1986 or online avantgardehair.com. Location services for BC Brew on Tap provided by Mahoney & Sons at Canada Place. For a list of locations, visit mahoneyandSons.com.
Welcome back to BC Brew on Tap from Mahoney & Sons at Canada Place as we shine the spotlight on the craft beer industry in and around British Columbia and in some cases beyond. Darren Hollett is the brewery manager from Hearthstone Brewing in North Vancouver. Pleasure to see you again, sir.
Thanks, Joe.
One thing I love about this industry, among many other things, is the fact that like no space goes unwasted. Everything is sort of seems recyclable. So when somebody outgrows one brewery, somebody else finds a way to move in. That was the case in your situation. But more importantly than that, like the personnel, the people that you meet along the way. I know you've been through beer companies before. You know, now you're doing your own thing. It really kind of makes for a very, very close-knit community, doesn't it?
It's true. Yeah, no, very fortunate to be in the industry that we're in. Everybody, even though we are competing, it's a friendly industry. We all have beer crushes on each other. So I have my favorite brewery or favorite breweries, and we're craft beer geeks at heart. So we have that, and we were lucky in our space in particular. It was Red Truck prior to us, and there's been a few breweries or brewers that have cut their teeth there, like Dave Varga and Ian Hill. So we're fortunate to be in our space and in the industry.
So it's interesting you should mention that because, for example, say one of their assistant brewers today probably has the vision that maybe 3 to 5 years down the road, he or she might be the next head brewer at their own operation or whatever. Does it really kind of work that way?
It does, and I think that you want those people working for you. You don't want someone that doesn't have the vision of eventually opening their own brewery, because if they are thinking that way, they have the passion and then they have the drive to be in the industry. That's the kind of person you want.
Is there any concern, Darren, when you look at the landscape and how new breweries are still emerging? And I've talked to so many people on this show, and the consensus is that no, we've not maxed out yet. There's still way more room to grow. Is there any concern, or are you all just thinking, as long as we're making good beer, let's strap ourselves in and go for the ride?
I think that's the biggest thing. I think that we still have a lot of room to grow in terms of numbers. If you look down to Portland, we're nowhere near the number that Portland has. I think as we grow in numbers in BC, the quality of beer will only get better. So those who are starting breweries just to start breweries will die off, and those who are brewing good beer will stick around, and so the quality of beer in BC and the education of the beer consumer will increase.
Now, you've newly opened your Tap and Forno on Marine Drive in North Vancouver, attached to your brewery. And I know on an upcoming episode of the show, we will actually be up there and talk about the food and beer pairing. But I think, does that not add like another dimension? If you were just another brewery, you know, pumping out 3 or 4 different beers and having a growler fill station, that's one thing. But the fact of the matter is you have an attached eatery where you really get the opportunity to kind of pair what's in a glass with what's on the plate.
Yeah, no, we're really fortunate. I love what we have going on at Hearthstone. So we have the brewery, but we're one of the only few breweries that have an actual restaurant attached to it. So we have a full lineup, full menu, and then Jared, who's our executive chef out there, he's producing awesome food. So to have that where we can pair every single one of our beers with a quality meal. Not only that, we have a great beer cocktail lineup as well. So we're full service. And I think that really sets us apart as a brewery with not just a tap room, but with a restaurant.
Now, something I do want to ask, because you're one of the few places that we've had on the show that you have a liquor primary license in your tap or in your Tap and Forno room. And again, we know that the handcrafted spirits market is really blooming in British Columbia, along with the craft beer market. Is it fair to assume that maybe that's the next wave, whereby some of these brewers will also start to branch out into spirits, as opposed to like having the old faithfuls on your shelf? Maybe you have your own spirits on the shelf. Is that? I'm not asking if that's your game plan. I'm just saying, is it fair to assume that that might be a wave down the road?
I mean, us personally, we aren't necessarily going to go that route. However, you do see Deep Cove, you do see Yaletown breweries doing that. It's a great thing. Say if we have a beer, on occasion, you know what, every single brewery will have a tank that doesn't go the way that we want it. You can then ultimately turn that beer into a spirit. And so, that, I think that's a great avenue for that. In terms of those industries, it's all craft. So, you know what, the more the merrier. I think it'd be great if that industry blooms. At the end of the day, I'm all about beer, though.
Okay, Darren Hollett, the brewing manager of Hearthstone Brewing, is our guest. Now, I want to talk about some of the beers in the portfolio, because I'm IPA guy, and you got to have a good IPA in your family. You got one?
We do. Yeah, no, very proud of our IPA. It's probably the recipe that we've tweaked the most over the past couple of years. A few months ago, we got to exactly where we wanted it to be. So it's Mosaic, Eldorado, and Amarillo hops in it. So very fruit forward, 6.5%. Extremely light too in color, so we let the hops do all the talking for that. And it's been doing very, very well for us. It's definitely kicked off over the past few months.
Now, I hear tell about a graham cookie.
Graham cracker.
Graham cracker. What's that all about?
So it's our winter seasonal this year. So it's 6%. We use vanilla, honey, ginger, and cinnamon in it to give the graham.
It's all nothing but goodness, right?
It is, 100%.
Okay, and how's the response been to that so far?
It's been good. It's been great. We've had it for 2 years now, and so this year a lot of people have been looking forward to it, and in our tap room we'll be doing some cocktails with it as well, so it definitely lends itself to that.
Now, you and I have talked before. I was late to the IPA party. Now I'm the biggest supporter, but the one place where I'm still not 100% yet is the sour thing. You do a sour?
We do. Yeah, we've done a couple sours. In the summer we did 4. So we had our raspberry Berliner-Weiss, which was a sour. We did a peach and a lychee in that series, and we also did a Cool Hand Cuke, which was a cucumber sour.
I know we've featured that on the show in a previous episode in a beer cocktail. So really the sky's the limit. There's nothing that is off limits when it comes to trying something in beer.
No, as long as it's good, I think that you can, like, we're lucky where we can try new things in the beer industry, and we have consumers that are willing to go out on a ledge and try something different, and so we're there to provide that.
Darren Hollett, brewery manager from Hearthstone Brewing. Pleasure, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you. This is BC Brew on Tap on Shaw TV. Welcome back to BC Brew on Tap from Mahoney & Sons at Canada Place. Time to get a little edumacation. Kai Miller is the education liaison for Camera Vancouver. Kai, pleasure to see you, sir.
See you too.
Now, I know that you teach this on a regular basis, so, I'm kind of curious the history of beer. And I don't know how far ago it's been plotted and verified, but what were people drinking, like, in the dawn of time?
So beer's been around basically since the beginning of human civilization. It was probably discovered in parallel with discovering agriculture. So the first human civilizations, the first cities that grew up in the Middle East, in Iraq or Syria, would have been beer-centric cultures. First record of beer we have comes from some of the earliest writing that exists. The ancient Sumerians in like 3000-ish BC were brewing beer, were writing about beer, and it was really central to Sumerian society.
But was it called beer, or was it what we now come to know as beer? Was it actually considered beer back then?
Okay, so what is beer? There were no hops in it.
Okay.
It wasn't clear, it wasn't fizzy.
So it probably wasn't very inviting in a glass. It was probably a little bit embarrassing to actually drink. Okay.
I mean, they were very proud of it. When you think of what their lives were like, I'm not an anthropologist, probably wasn't the most glamorous lifestyle as an ancient Sumerian, but you had beer, you could get a bit of a buzz on at the end of the day, that was nice. So they were taking grain, they were actually baking it into bread, crumbling it up in warm water, letting it sit for a few days, and then turning the whole thing into a clay pot, drinking it through a straw, because it was full of the grain and the yeast and everything else. So, I mean, they seemed to like it. They wrote hymns about it. It was religious for them. It's also how they paid their workers. It's how the economy functioned. People were paid in beer. So they were certainly proud of it.
Okay, well, I know that I've put you to the test here because I've tried to ask you to kind of express what like some of the generations of beer have been. You've got two samples here, so let's talk about this first and foremost.
All right.
What is this and what does this represent?
All right. Yeah, I didn't bring you a sample of the clay pot straw.
No, we don't need that.
All right. Right. This is a London porter. This one's not from London, but so fast forward from the Sumerians, you move into medieval Europe. People discover hops, start brewing what we'd recognize as beer. And what happens in the Middle Ages? Everyone's brewing at home. They're selling to their neighbors. It's small scale. You get into the 18th century, and people start brewing on a huge scale. And where that happened most noticeably was London and London porter breweries. So this is an example of that.
Okay, and they used this kind of vessel, generally speaking?
Yeah, so until you had glass mass-produced everywhere, people were drinking out of pewter or out of ceramic or out of stoneware everywhere.
Okay. So, and the one thing that
see through it.
The one thing that we've learned on the show is that the vessel which contains the liquid can certainly affect the taste of the liquid as well.
Absolutely.
Right? Okay.
So you had, at this point, you had brewing went from something that could be done in the home or on a small scale for your block. Actually, frequently in the Middle Ages, most of the brewers were women, and it's one of the few ways that women could support themselves. In the 18th century, you have breweries getting bigger and bigger. Their techniques were better, their beer was more consistent, it lasted more, you could send it everywhere. So you had huge breweries grow up. You had horse-driven breweries. You had mechanization like grain mills and augers and pumps and everything.
Okay, now I know that moving along here, Pilsner Urquell, this is from the town of Pilsen.
Yep. This is the original.
This is the original. Okay, so what does this represent in terms of an era?
So, in the 19th century, 1840s, you started brewing this, and a few things had happened which allowed Pilsner to happen. People had started to figure out the biology of yeast. They could make lagers outside of Bavaria where they came from. The British, actually, making porter, had discovered that...
good pour, by the way, buddy. That
looks pretty nice.
That's a really good pour, yeah.
They got... people could make paler malts that had... were better for brewing than malts they'd used before. All these kind of came together in Czechoslovakia, in Pilsen, or the Czech Republic. And they started brewing this pale lager, which was light, easy to drink, and also 19th century, people had glasses that they could see through, and it's a very pretty beer. You have these pale beers you can see through, they taste nice. You know what? It took the world by storm.
This serious. That's almost like a TV commercial style pour there.
I am a professional.
You are a professional.
And this kind of took the world by storm, and this was the first light lager. Took over the brewing world. They were made in Germany, Denmark, they moved to the United States. Yeah.
There's no depth to this man's knowledge. He's the education liaison for Camera Vancouver. Kai Miller, thanks, buddy.
Yeah, thank you.
Cheers. This is BC Brew on Tap on Shaw TV.
Host hair services for Joe Leary and BC Brew on Tap provided by Bailey Murphy of Avant Garde Hair Studio in Yaletown at 1075 Mainland Street. For a list of services, call 604-688-1986 or online avantgardehair.com. Location services for BC Brew on Tap provided by Mahoney & Sons at Canada Place. For a list of locations, visit mahoneyandsons.com.
Well, it's time for a little episode we call Smarty Pints, which stars Mr. Jay Schreiber.
Hey,
Jay,
Joe. How you doing?
always a pleasure, sir.
Thanks, Joe. Yeah.
Always love to get together with you on this because I learned things about beer that heretofore I may not have known. So what are we talking today?
Today we're going to talk about higher ABV beers. Now, ABV means alcohol by volume, and that is a percentage of the drink you are consuming that has alcohol in it. Most beers, say Joe average beer drinker, would go for a beer that's around 5%. 5% seems to be the sweet spot for a lot of lagers, pilsners, ales. But we're going to talk today about some beers that are actually higher in alcohol percentage. One of which being we're going to talk actually about beers that are probably around 8 or 9%. I want to start over here actually with our friends at Fuggles and Warlock. They're coming out with an Imperial or Russian Imperial Stout. This beer clocks in around 9.5%. Now, just for audience at home, these are not beers you would drink a lot of. In the responsible drinking realm, you want to sip this one and share it with your friends. I was going to talk a little bit about Lighthouse Brewing. They're coming out with a beer, actually beer for Just Here for the Beer radio show. This is a 9.1% Imperial IPA. Very, very heavy beer there. The next beer we're going to talk about here is actually our friends at Daggerad in Burnaby. They do a beer every single year called an Anno. And Anno, this is actually one is from my personal collection. I started collecting this from their 2014, and every year when they release the next batch, I age it for a year and drink it. High alcohol beers, interesting little fact.
And as you age it, does the alcohol content rise, or does
sometimes it can, yes.
Yeah?
Especially with a beer such as this, which is unfiltered, still has yeast in there, which can re-ferment over the course of time and actually create more alcohol. With aging beers, generally with a lot of the higher ABV beers, you find that they age really, really, really well because they have the alcohol to stand up to the test of time. And then this one is from our friends at Driftwood. I love this. It's a black label. It's a black beer. It's got a black little wax cap on it. This beer has actually been referred to as almost like drinking motor oil. Sometimes because of its
Castrol in a bottle.
Castrol in a bottle, yeah, because
right,
of its viscosity. This is just
is that a good thing though? Like,
you know, I think for like I said, a beer like this where you'd want to share it or you'd only want to drink a small amount or it would be saved for a special occasion.
Right.
I think it's actually it's a good thing to have a high viscosity, to have also a higher alcohol content in it. Can definitely add to the characteristics of the beer.
well, okay, that's certainly good to know, and this is a good point to close the show. Thank you, Mr. Smarty Pints,
Hey,
Jay
Joe,
Schreiber.
thanks for having me on.
Once again, enjoy these beers, but especially in these cases and others, always plan a safe ride home, and please drink responsibly. See you again.
Clothing for Joe Leary and BC Brew on Tap supplied by Red Dragon Apparel. RedDragonApparel.com. For BC Brew on Tap, this is Mike Schaefer.